summer carnival rolled into the small American town like a colorful storm. Long before sunrise, trucks carrying bright red and golden tents rumbled across the dusty fairgrounds. Workers hammered wooden stakes into the earth while strings of lights stretched from pole to pole. By noon, the smell of roasted peanuts, popcorn, grilled corn, and sweet cotton candy drifted through the warm air. Children laughed as they chased balloons between colorful attractions, while musicians played cheerful melodies that echoed across the grounds. To most families, it was simply another traveling circus, but to those who had heard the rumors, there was only one attraction that truly mattered: the world's strongest man. His name was Magnus Kane. Every poster showed the same impossible image: a gigantic blond man snapping iron chains across his chest while standing beside a motorcycle balanced on one shoulder. Many assumed the posters exaggerated. They were wrong. When Magnus finally emerged before the evening crowd, every conversation stopped. He stood almost 7 feet tall, his shoulders nearly filling the entrance to the massive performance tent. His sleeveless khaki work shirt barely contained arms that looked carved from granite. Thick veins covered his forearms like ropes beneath weathered skin. Every slow step shook the wooden stage beneath him. Children instinctively moved behind their parents. Adults stared in disbelief. Magnus didn't simply look strong. He looked unstoppable. The announcer's booming voice echoed through the loudspeakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for the strongest human being you will ever witness." The audience exploded into applause. Magnus lifted an enormous steel bar thicker than a man's wrist. Without rushing, without grunting, he slowly bent it into a perfect horseshoe. The crowd gasped. Next came 3 enormous barrels filled with concrete. Workers struggled just to roll them onto the stage. Magnus lifted all 3 together. Then came the grand finale. A fully loaded pickup truck slowly drove onto a reinforced platform. Heavy chains connected the truck to Magnus's massive leather harness. The driver slammed the brakes, the tires locked, the engine roared. Smoke poured from the spinning wheels. Magnus leaned forward. Every muscle in his enormous back tightened. One slow step. Another. Another. The pickup truck began moving. The audience erupted. People stood on their chairs. Children screamed with excitement. Women covered their mouths in disbelief. Magnus raised both fists toward the sky like an undefeated champion. The applause continued for nearly 2 full minutes. He loved every second of it. Not because people admired him, because they feared him. Fear made him feel powerful, and Magnus had become addicted to power years ago. No one knew much about his past. Only whispers traveled with the circus. Some claimed he had once been a dock worker who defeated professional wrestlers for money. Others believed he had fought underground matches where opponents were carried away unconscious. No story could ever be confirmed, but everyone agreed on one thing: Magnus had never lost a public challenge. Not once. After every performance, he repeated the same ritual. He walked to the center of the arena, crossed his massive arms, and shouted loudly enough for the entire fairground to hear, "Anyone?" Silence. "I said, anyone!" Nobody moved. Sometimes local wrestlers considered stepping forward. Their friends always stopped them. Boxers looked away. Weightlifters suddenly became interested in the ground. Even soldiers visiting the carnival quietly shook their heads. Facing Magnus meant humiliation. Or worse. Magnus laughed. I thought so. The audience laughed with him. Every night ended exactly the same. Until one evening, everything changed. 3 days later, the carnival became even more crowded. Word had spread across neighboring towns about the giant strongman. Visitors traveled for hours simply to watch his demonstrations. The evening air buzzed with excitement. The sky glowed orange as the sun disappeared behind distant trees. String lights illuminated every pathway. Children held melting ice cream. Teenagers gathered near the games. Musicians played cheerful jazz near the entrance. No one noticed the quiet stranger walking alone toward the main tent. He wore simple black Chinese training clothes. No expensive shoes, no jewelry, no bodyguards. His hands rested calmly behind his back. His expression remained peaceful. He walked slowly, observing everything. Workers rushing around him barely noticed. The ticket collector smiled politely. Enjoy the show. The stranger nodded. Thank you. Inside the giant tent, nearly 2,000 spectators filled every seat. The performance began. Acrobats flew through the air. Clowns entertained children. Lions leaped through rings. The audience applauded every act. Finally, the lights dimmed. Drums thundered. The announcer's voice returned. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves once again. The audience joined in. The strongest man alive. Magnus stepped into the spotlight. His entrance felt even more dramatic than before. He smashed thick wooden boards using only his forearm. He twisted steel rods around his neck. He carried 2 enormous circus horses several feet using specially designed harnesses. Every feat fueled the crowd's excitement. Then his eyes wandered across the audience. They stopped. Near the front stood the quiet man dressed completely in black. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't clapping. He wasn't cheering. He simply watched, calmly. Magnus frowned. After the performance ended, he stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward him. Each heavy footstep echoed across the wooden floor. People instinctively stepped aside. The stranger never moved. Magnus stopped only inches away. You didn't clap. The man looked into his eyes. I was watching. Magnus smirked. Didn't impress you? It was impressive. But there is a difference between strength, he paused, and mastery. Several nearby spectators turned toward them. Magnus chuckled. Mastery? The stranger nodded. You have remarkable power. But power without discipline eventually controls the man who possesses it. Magnus's smile disappeared. Nobody spoke to him that way. Ever. You think you're wiser than me? I think everyone can still learn. Magnus leaned closer. And who exactly are you? The man answered quietly, My name is Bruce. The name meant nothing to Magnus, but several older spectators froze. One elderly Chinese immigrant standing near the popcorn stand suddenly whispered to his wife, It can't be. His wife stared. Bruce Lee. The words spread through nearby rows like a gust of wind. Did he say Bruce Lee? Impossible. Is that really him? Magnus overheard the whispers. He laughed loudly. So you're famous somewhere. Bruce remained silent. That silence irritated Magnus more than insults ever could. He pointed one enormous finger directly at Bruce's chest. You don't look like much. Bruce smiled faintly. Looks often mislead people. Magnus cracked his neck. The sound echoed sharply. "I've crushed men twice your size," Bruce answered softly. "And yet," Magnus narrowed his eyes, "you've never met me." The atmosphere changed instantly. Even the musicians outside stopped playing. People sensed something unusual unfolding. Children stopped eating popcorn. Workers abandoned their stations. Everyone watched. Magnus suddenly raised his voice. "You have 10 seconds." Bruce remained still. "To do what?" "Run." A nervous laugh spread through the audience. Bruce's calm expression never changed. Instead, he slowly folded his hands behind his back. "I'm not here to fight." Magnus grinned. "Then you're standing in the wrong place." Bruce looked past him. Near one of the equipment wagons, a frightened young boy knelt beside a broken wooden airplane. Tears filled his eyes while his mother tried to comfort him. Bruce quietly asked, "Did you break his toy?" Magnus shrugged without remorse. "He should have stayed out of my way." Bruce walked toward the child, picked up the broken airplane, and gently handed it back. "It's fixable," he said with a reassuring smile. The boy managed a small nod. Bruce then turned back to Magnus. His voice remained calm, but now it carried unmistakable authority. "Strength exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Magnus scoffed. "In my world, strength belongs to whoever can take it." Bruce stepped closer. "No. It belongs to whoever can control it." The two men stood face to face beneath the glowing circus lights. The air itself seemed to grow heavier. Neither man blinked. Neither looked away. Around them, nearly 2,000 spectators held their breath. No one realized they were about to witness the first moments of a confrontation that would become one of the most unforgettable stories the carnival had ever known. And before the night was over, the strongest man in America would discover that raw muscle alone could never guarantee victory. The silence inside the circus tent felt heavier than iron. Nearly 2,000 spectators stood frozen, their eyes locked on the two men standing only a few feet apart. On one side stood Magnus Kane, a mountain of muscle, a man whose reputation had frightened challengers away for years. On the other side stood Bruce Lee, smaller, calm, completely expressionless. The contrast between them was almost unbelievable. Magnus towered over Bruce by more than a foot. His shoulders looked twice as wide. His fists resembled heavy hammers, while Bruce's hands remained relaxed at his sides, almost gentle. The audience whispered among themselves, "This won't last 5 seconds. The giant is going to crush him. Someone should stop this." Others, however, noticed something strange. Bruce wasn't afraid, not even slightly. His breathing stayed perfectly steady. His heartbeat seemed untouched by the tension surrounding him. Magnus interpreted that calmness as arrogance. "You still have time to leave," Magnus said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Bruce answered with quiet confidence, "I've never believed in running from problems." Magnus smirked. "Good." He slowly removed the leather harness from his shoulders and tossed it aside. The heavy straps slammed onto the wooden floor with a loud thud. Workers hurried backward. The ringmaster rushed toward them. "Gentlemen, please." Magnus raised one enormous hand. "Stay out of this." The ringmaster immediately stopped. Everyone working at the carnival knew better than to argue with Magnus. He had become the circus's biggest attraction. Losing him meant losing thousands of ticket sales. The owner himself remained silent. Money had made him blind. Bruce noticed that. His eyes slowly scanned the frightened workers standing nearby. Some lowered their heads. Some looked away. Fear had become normal here. That bothered him more than Magnus himself. Bruce spoke calmly. "How many people have you humiliated here?" Magnus laughed. "They volunteered." Bruce looked toward an elderly stage worker whose hands trembled while collecting equipment. The old man's eyes immediately dropped to the floor. Bruce understood everything without asking. Magnus didn't simply challenge people, he ruled through intimidation. That ended tonight. Magnus took another step. Wood creaked beneath his enormous weight. "So, you planning to lecture me all night?" Bruce shook his head. "No. I came to give you a chance," the audience murmured. Magnus burst into laughter. "A chance?" Bruce nodded. "Apologize to everyone you've bullied." The laughter instantly stopped. Magnus stared at him as if he had misheard. "You want me," he pointed toward himself, "to apologize?" "Yes." Magnus smiled. It wasn't amusement anymore. It was anger. Slowly, dangerously, he rolled his massive shoulders. "You know what happens when people embarrass me?" Bruce answered. "They embarrass themselves." Magnus's face darkened. Without warning, he shoved Bruce with both hands. Gasps erupted throughout the tent. But something unexpected happened. Bruce barely moved. Instead of resisting the force directly, he allowed his body to glide backward several inches before settling into balance again. No stumble, no panic, only control. Magnus blinked. He had expected the smaller man to fly across the floor. Instead, it felt as though he had pushed flowing water. The audience noticed it too. "What just happened?" "I don't know. I've never seen anyone absorb force like that." Magnus frowned. Now he was curious. For years, every confrontation had ended after one shove. Nobody stayed standing. Bruce simply adjusted his sleeves. "Are you finished?" The words stung Magnus's pride. His ears turned red. "You think you're clever?" Bruce smiled faintly. "I think you're angry. And angry people become predictable." Magnus clenched both fists. His breathing grew louder. Bruce could already see the changes, the tightening jaw, the narrowed eyes, the rising shoulders. Every movement revealed exactly what Magnus intended to do. Bruce remained perfectly relaxed. The giant suddenly roared, then charged. The wooden floor trembled beneath each thunderous step. Children screamed. Parents grabbed them and pulled them backward. Several spectators climbed onto benches to escape if the giant lost control. Magnus swung a massive right hook. The punch cut through the air like a wrecking ball. Bruce wasn't there. He had already stepped aside. Barely 3 inches. The enormous fist missed completely. Before Magnus could recover, Bruce tapped his forearm with 2 fingers. Not a strike, just a touch. Yet Magnus's arm suddenly dropped lower than intended. His momentum shifted. His balance changed. The audience couldn't understand why. Magnus certainly couldn't. He spun around angrily. "You moved!" Bruce smiled. "Of course." "What did you expect?" The crowd laughed nervously. Magnus hated hearing laughter directed at him. Again he charged, this time faster. His left hand shot forward, trying to grab Bruce by the collar. Bruce slipped underneath the reaching arm. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground. Every movement flowed naturally into the next. Magnus turned again. Nothing. Bruce had already changed position. He wasn't attacking. He wasn't even blocking. He was simply making the giant chase empty space. 5 attacks, 5 misses. Each failure increased Magnus's frustration. Sweat began forming across the giant's forehead. His breathing became heavier. Bruce's breathing never changed. One spectator whispered, "He's making him tired." Another older man nodded slowly. Exactly. Magnus had spent years believing fights were won through strength. Bruce understood something entirely different. A fight often begins long before the first successful strike. Every unnecessary movement drains energy. Every missed attack steals confidence. Every emotional decision creates another mistake. Bruce intended to let Magnus defeat himself first. The giant refused to recognize it. He charged again, this time grabbing a heavy wooden performance bench. With one incredible motion, he lifted it above his head. People screamed. The ringmaster shouted, "Magnus, stop!" Ignoring him completely, Magnus hurled the bench forward. Bruce stepped diagonally. The bench crashed into empty space before exploding against the arena fence. Wood splintered everywhere. Dust filled the air. Children cried. Several women covered their faces. Workers ran to protect the audience. Bruce looked disappointed. Someone could have been hurt. Magnus pointed angrily. "This is your fault." Bruce slowly shook his head. "No, you chose that." The words landed harder than any punch. Magnus growled. His emotions now controlled every decision. Bruce remained patient. "You still have time," Magnus sneered. "For what?" "To stop." The giant answered with another charge. This one was reckless. His shoulders leaned too far forward. His feet became uneven. Bruce noticed every flaw instantly. He stepped aside, placed one open hand lightly against Magnus's elbow. The other rested gently on the giant's shoulder. Nothing more. No violent strike, no dramatic blow, only perfect timing. Magnus's own speed became his enemy. Unable to recover, the enormous strong man stumbled past Bruce. His boots slipped across scattered sawdust. He crashed through a display of wooden crates. The entire stack collapsed beneath his weight. The audience exploded, not with cheers, with disbelief. Magnus climbed back to his feet, breathing heavily. His face burned with humiliation. No one had ever made him look foolish before, not once. Bruce stood exactly where he had started. His clothes remained untouched. His breathing remained calm. Magnus stared. "What are you?" Bruce answered quietly. "A student." The audience exchanged confused glances. "A student?" Bruce nodded. "I never stopped learning." Magnus shook his head violently. "No." "You're mocking me." Bruce looked directly into his eyes. "I'm showing you something." "What?" "That strength without discipline creates destruction." Magnus glanced around. Broken benches, destroyed crates, terrified children, frightened workers, everything damaged, had been destroyed by his own actions, not Bruce's. For the first time that evening, a tiny seed of doubt appeared inside the giant's mind. It lasted only a moment. His pride crushed it immediately. "I don't care." He slowly reached behind the stage, his enormous hand wrapped around something long and heavy, a thick steel bar, the same solid bar he had bent during the performance. Except this one remained perfectly straight. Workers gasped. The ringmaster turned pale. Even the circus owner stepped backward. Bruce's eyes narrowed for the first time that night. Not from fear, from disappointment. "I warned you." Magnus rested the steel bar across his shoulder. "You've done nothing except run." Bruce calmly lowered into a balanced stance. "No, I've been waiting." The giant tightened his grip. The audience realized the confrontation was about to become far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And this time, Bruce Lee would finally stop avoiding the fight. The steel bar gleamed beneath the warm circus lights. A ripple of fear swept through the audience. Children clung tightly to their parents. The musicians who had entertained the crowd only minutes earlier quietly placed their instruments on the ground. Nobody wanted to make a sound. Magnus Kane slowly spun the thick steel bar in one enormous hand. The heavy metal whistled through the air. Every rotation reminded the audience that this wasn't a harmless performance anymore. One mistake could kill someone. Bruce watched silently. His dark eyes never left Magnus's shoulders. Not the steel bar, not his hands, his shoulders. That was where every attack truly began. Magnus grinned. "So, you finally stopped smiling," Bruce answered calmly. "I smile when people choose wisdom. You've chosen something else." Magnus slammed the steel bar against the wooden floor. The impact echoed through the entire tent. Dust drifted from the ceiling. "You think you can read me?" Bruce nodded. "I already have." Magnus exploded forward. The steel bar swept horizontally toward Bruce's ribs. The audience screamed. The attack carried enough force to shatter a tree trunk. Bruce moved. Not backward, forward. He stepped inside the arc of the swing before the steel bar could reach full speed. Magnus's eyes widened. Impossible. Nobody had ever moved toward one of his attacks. Bruce's left forearm lightly redirected Magnus's wrist. His right palm touched the giant's chest. Not a strike, only a brief push. Magnus stumbled sideways. The steel bar missed Bruce by inches before smashing into one of the thick wooden support posts. Crack! The massive beam splintered. The entire tent trembled. People rushed away from the collapsing section. Workers grabbed the ropes supporting the roof before panic spread. Bruce immediately turned toward the frightened families. Everyone moved toward the exits. His voice wasn't loud, yet somehow every person heard him. The crowd obeyed instantly. Magnus ripped the bent steel bar free from the damaged post. His breathing had changed. Gone was the confidence that had filled the arena earlier. Now, there was frustration, confusion, and something even more dangerous. Desperation. "You should have stayed down!" Magnus roared. Bruce shook his head. "I was never down." The giant charged again. This time he abandoned technique completely. The steel bar became a wild weapon. Horizontal swings, vertical strikes, powerful thrusts. Each attack was capable of breaking bones. Bruce slipped between them like flowing water. His feet barely made a sound. Every movement wasted almost no energy. The audience watched with growing disbelief. One elderly boxing coach whispered, "Look at the distance." Another former wrestler nodded. "He's making every inch count." Bruce wasn't simply avoiding attacks. He was controlling space. Every step forced Magnus into awkward positions. Every missed strike required enormous effort to recover. The giant became slower. Only slightly. But Bruce noticed. That tiny change was enough. Magnus raised the steel bar above his head. With a roar, he brought it crashing downward. Bruce pivoted. The bar slammed into the wooden floor. It buried itself several inches into the thick boards. Magnus pulled. Nothing. He pulled harder. The bar remained stuck. For one brief second, the strongest man in America was trapped by his own strength. Bruce acted. His foot lightly tapped Magnus's front ankle. His shoulder pressed gently against the giant's chest. His left hand guided Magnus's elbow upward. Simple, precise, effortless. The result shocked everyone. Magnus lost balance. His enormous body rotated awkwardly. The trapped steel bar acted like an anchor. The giant crashed onto his side with enough force to shake the arena. The audience gasped. Bruce stepped back immediately. He made no attempt to attack the fallen man. Instead, he waited. Magnus looked up from the floor, his face burned with humiliation. No blood, no broken bones, yet somehow he had never felt more defeated. Bruce extended one hand. "Stand!" Magnus slapped it away. "I don't need your help!" His roar echoed across the fairgrounds. Outside the tent, curious visitors stopped walking. People gathered near every entrance. Within minutes, hundreds more spectators surrounded the circus. Rumors spread rapidly. "The giant is losing! Someone is actually fighting Magnus. They say it's Bruce Lee." More people flooded toward the tent. Inside, Magnus climbed to his feet. His breathing had become ragged. Sweat soaked his shirt. Bruce remained almost untouched. Magnus stared in disbelief. "Why aren't you tired?" Bruce answered honestly. "Because I'm not fighting your body." Magnus frowned. "What?" "I'm fighting your mistakes." The words struck harder than any punch. Magnus suddenly remembered every missed attack, every failed grab, every wasted burst of strength, every reckless charge. Bruce had forced him to create all of them. Rage consumed him again. With a furious shout, Magnus tore the steel bar from the floor at last. He threw it aside. It crashed through several empty chairs. Then he clenched both fists. No more games. Bruce nodded slowly. "I agree." The atmosphere changed instantly. For the first time, Bruce lowered into a true fighting stance. His weight settled evenly. His knees relaxed. Both hands rose naturally, not dramatically, simply ready. A murmur swept through the crowd. "Now he's serious." Magnus charged with incredible speed. His massive right fist shot toward Bruce's head. Bruce slipped outside. A straight punch landed gently against Magnus's shoulder. Not enough to injure, only enough to interrupt his balance. Before Magnus recovered, a second strike touched his ribs, then another to the opposite shoulder, then a quick palm to the chest, then a short back fist near the jaw. The movements happened so quickly that many spectators saw only blurred motion. Magnus staggered backward. "What?" His sentence never finished. Bruce was already beside him. Another rapid combination landed across the giant's arms, chest, and torso. None of the blows looked especially powerful, yet each one disrupted Magnus's breathing. His legs felt strangely heavy. His shoulders refused to respond normally. The audience erupted. "Did you see that? I couldn't even follow his hands. How many strikes was that?" An old martial arts instructor quietly counted under his breath. 12. His grandson looked shocked. 12! The instructor nodded. In less than 3 seconds. Magnus backed away. For the first time in years, fear entered his eyes. Not fear of pain, fear of the unknown. Everything he believed about fighting had collapsed. He couldn't catch Bruce. He couldn't overpower him. He couldn't even predict where the next strike would come from. Bruce spoke softly. "This can still end peacefully." Magnus wiped sweat from his face. His pride screamed louder than his reason. I've never surrendered." Bruce looked at him with genuine sympathy. "I'm not asking you to surrender. I'm asking you to grow." Magnus answered with another furious roar. He gathered every ounce of strength remaining in his exhausted body. The entire audience knew what was coming. One final attack. Everything depended on it. The giant lowered his head and launched himself forward like a charging bull. The wooden floor thundered beneath him. Bruce remained perfectly still. Closer, closer, closer. At the final possible instant, Bruce moved. One precise sidestep, a slight turn of his hips, one guiding hand against Magnus's forearm. The giant's unstoppable momentum carried him directly past Bruce. Unable to stop, Magnus crashed through the enormous wooden gate leading outside the circus tent. The heavy doors exploded apart. Splinters flew into the evening air. The crowd outside jumped back in shock. Magnus rolled across the dusty ground before finally coming to a stop beneath the glowing carnival lights. Inside the silent tent, Bruce slowly lowered his hands. The fight wasn't over, but everyone watching realized something undeniable. The giant had thrown every ounce of power he possessed into the battle. Bruce Lee had finally begun to fight, and what came next would determine not only who won, but whether Magnus Kane would leave the carnival as the same man who had entered it. The shattered wooden gates swung back and forth in the evening breeze. Outside the circus tent, hundreds of people who had gathered after hearing the commotion stood completely still. Magnus Kane lay on the dusty carnival road. His massive chest rose and fell like a steam engine. For several seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sounds were the distant carnival rides, the soft music from another tent, and the heavy breathing of the strongest man anyone had ever seen. Bruce Lee walked calmly through the broken entrance. His black training uniform was covered with a thin layer of dust, but otherwise looked untouched. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He simply looked at Magnus with quiet compassion. The giant slowly pushed himself onto one knee. His muscles trembled, not because they lacked strength, because they were exhausted. Bruce had forced him to waste nearly every ounce of energy he possessed. Magnus looked up. For the first time in years, he saw someone standing before him whom he couldn't intimidate. The crowd surrounded them in a wide circle. Workers, families, circus performers, veterans, police officers who had arrived after hearing reports of a fight. Everyone waited. Magnus finally spoke. His voice sounded different, less confident. "Finish it." Bruce looked at him quietly. "I already have." Magnus frowned. "What?" "The fight ended the moment you stopped thinking." The words echoed inside the giant's mind. He remembered every reckless attack, every angry decision, every opportunity Bruce had given him to walk away. Bruce had warned him again and again. He simply refused to listen. Magnus slowly stood. His knees almost buckled beneath his own weight. Even standing had become difficult. Yet his pride refused to disappear. "You never beat me." Bruce tilted his head slightly. "No? You only kept moving." Bruce nodded. "Because fighting isn't about proving how hard you can hit. It's about choosing when you don't have to." Some people in the audience exchanged confused glances. Others nodded quietly. An elderly Marine veteran stepped forward. "I've seen combat." He looked directly at Magnus. "That young man defeated you before either of you threw the first real punch." Magnus looked at the old veteran. How? The veteran answered without hesitation. You fought with anger. He fought with patience. Magnus remained silent. Bruce walked toward the broken wooden gate. He bent down and picked up one of the shattered beams. The beam was thick, solid oak, nearly 6 feet long. Bruce carried it effortlessly, not because it was light, but because his movement was efficient. He placed it upright in the dirt, then looked at Magnus. Punch it. Magnus frowned. What? Break it. The giant smirked. Finally, something familiar. He tightened his fist. With a powerful shout, he drove a devastating punch into the beam. The wood cracked. Large splinters flew. But the beam remained standing. Magnus hit it again. Another crack. Again. Finally, after several crushing blows, the beam split apart. The audience applauded. Magnus breathed heavily. Bruce picked up another beam, exactly the same size. He held it loosely, then looked toward the audience. Watch carefully. Without winding up, without shouting, without tightening every muscle, Bruce delivered one incredibly short strike. A sharp burst of movement. The beam snapped cleanly into 2 pieces. Silence. Even Magnus stared in disbelief. Bruce handed him 1/2 of the broken beam. Power. Then he held the other half. Precision. He placed both pieces together. Separate, they accomplish little. But together, they become extraordinary. Magnus slowly lowered his eyes. The lesson finally reached him. For years he had trained only his muscles, never his mind, never his discipline, never his control. Bruce continued, When people feared you, you believed they respected you. Magnus didn't answer. They never did. They were simply afraid. The words hurt more than every strike Bruce had landed. Magnus looked around. For the first time, he truly saw the faces surrounding him. Children hiding behind their parents, workers avoiding eye contact, performers standing nervously. Nobody admired him. Nobody smiled when they looked at him. They simply hoped he wouldn't notice them. A little boy suddenly stepped forward. The same child whose wooden airplane had been broken earlier that evening. He still held the damaged toy. Bruce knelt beside him. May I see it? The boy nodded. Bruce carefully examined the broken wing. One of the circus carpenters quietly approached. Without saying a word, he handed Bruce a small bottle of wood glue and several tiny carving tools. Bruce smiled. Thank you. The carpenter smiled back. For the next several minutes, thousands of spectators watched in complete silence. Not a fight, not another challenge. Instead, Bruce patiently repaired the toy airplane. He sanded the broken edges, applied fresh glue, realigned the tiny wooden wing, then carefully polished the repaired section until it looked almost new. Finally, he handed it back. The little boy's eyes filled with tears. It looks better than before. Bruce smiled warmly. Sometimes things become stronger after they're repaired. Magnus heard every word. He understood Bruce wasn't talking about the toy. Bruce stood once more and walked toward him. The giant looked away. I don't deserve your respect, Bruce answered immediately. Respect isn't given because someone is perfect. It's earned when someone chooses to change. The words lingered in the evening air. Magnus remained motionless. Then, very slowly, the strongest man in the circus lowered his head. Not because someone forced him, because he chose to. I was wrong. The words barely escaped his lips. Nobody had ever heard Magnus Kane apologize. He turned toward the frightened workers. "I'm sorry." He faced the performers. "I'm sorry." Then the families. "I'm sorry." Finally, he knelt before the little boy. "I'm sorry for frightening you." The child looked toward Bruce. Bruce gave him a reassuring nod. The boy smiled. "It's okay." Magnus closed his eyes. Years of pride disappeared in a single moment. The audience erupted into thunderous applause, not because Bruce had won the fight, because something far greater had happened. A man had defeated his own arrogance. The circus owner slowly walked toward Bruce. "I've never seen anything like this." Bruce smiled politely. "You didn't. You saw what happens when strength finally meets humility." The owner looked around at the cheering crowd. "I owe you more money than this circus has." Bruce laughed softly. "I wasn't here for money." "What were you here for?" Bruce looked toward Magnus, who was now helping workers rebuild the broken entrance with his enormous strength. "This." The owner followed Bruce's gaze. The giant, who had once terrified everyone, was now lifting broken beams, apologizing to workers, and asking where they needed help. Children cautiously approached him. Instead of shouting, Magnus smiled. He gently lifted one little girl onto his shoulder so she could hang a string of carnival lights back in place. The audience watched in amazement. The transformation seemed impossible. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, the carnival slowly returned to life. Music filled the air once again. The popcorn machine started popping. Children laughed. The fear that had haunted the circus for years had vanished. Bruce quietly picked up his small travel bag. Without asking for recognition, without posing for photographs, without accepting rewards, he began walking toward the carnival exit. Magnus noticed. "Bruce!" Bruce stopped, but didn't turn around. "Thank you." Bruce smiled faintly. There is no victory in defeating another person. He finally looked back. The greatest victory is defeating the person you used to be. Magnus nodded slowly. "I'll remember that." Bruce continued walking into the fading light. Within moments, he disappeared into the evening crowd like an ordinary traveler, yet everyone present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Years later, the children who had stood inside that circus would tell their own families about the night a quiet martial artist faced the strongest man they had ever seen. They wouldn't remember the broken benches, or the shattered gates, or the impossible speed. They would remember something far more important. They would remember that true strength never needed to shout. It never needed to humiliate. It never needed to prove itself through fear. Because real strength carried humility. Real strength protected the weak. And real strength walked away the moment violence was no longer necessary. That night, the carnival gained more than a legend. It gained a lesson that would outlive every tent, every performance, and every roaring applause. The strongest man did not lose because he lacked power. He lost because he finally discovered what true power really meant.